Didn't want to be on welfare. I hated it. I was ashamed to be on welfare. I was living in an area where all my neighbours were also on welfare.
It makes you angry because, you know, you don't know why. You try to get enough, but for me, I find it really impossible to get enough groceries in for 2 weeks.
Well, it hasn't been easy, I'll tell you that much. My husband worked for 15 years with CN, and then he got sick and he couldn't do it anymore, so we had to go on to welfare, and it wasn't that nice.
I'd like to be able to give them more better clothes and feed them more better and stuff like that, and make sure, you know, the education and everything.
Say it was always negative because you were always saying no, right? And your children then, as they got older, got to the point where they wouldn't ask. And I think that's what hurts even more, is their silence.
Poverty is a serious problem in Canada. In 1980, food banks were non-existent. Since then, they've been springing up in ever-increasing numbers, an indication that more and more people are finding it difficult to provide even the basic necessity of food for themselves and their families. Although Newfoundland and Labrador is no stranger to poverty historically, it appears that here too growing numbers of people are having to turn to charity to meet their basic food needs. Pat Lee of the St. John City Index Referral Association noted in a recent newspaper article, "I can see no end to it. When I started 25 years ago, we helped 500 families just at Christmas, and we closed office until the next year. Last Christmas, we helped 6,000 families." How do we explain this phenomenon? We can assume that individual people are to blame for their impoverishment, or we can look more closely at the issue and try to find the root causes of poverty.
And, you know, people who are working are even having a hard time. They don't know when they're going to be laid off. They could be in the same situation today as we are in. I never expected this when I planned trade school and my whole life to ever go to a food bank or ever have to apply to welfare. I thought I would never, ever have to deal with that. But I did.
They're blamed for being in the position they're in when oftentimes it's through no fault of their own. It's circumstances that are beyond their control, if you wish.
Society looks at single moms as the problem. Now, I can't see how a bunch of women can be a problem. I think is the things that are happening to us, the circumstances that we're in are the problems.
For, you know, been living in poverty for quite some time, people sort of lose sort of hope that they can even find meaningful employment, even if it was available. And it just sort of destroys the soul, I think, is a best way I can describe what happens to people who are living in this situation. And see, I've lived here for 4 years, and the people here, you know, they're victims of a situation that they don't have much control over, and they'd certainly love to change it if they could. And
I think we have a tendency, if we're in the middle class, to feel that somehow we have worked harder, somehow we have a right to what we've achieved, and somehow we deserve what we've achieved. And if people are suffering and struggling with poverty, it's because of something they've done or they haven't done. And I think the challenge came for me with the understanding that oftentimes it's circumstances which make the difference, not the capabilities of the person, not the strength or the integrity or anything involved with the person, but just the circumstances. That had circumstances been different, I could be in a very different situation from now. And I think that's the challenge.
Looking at poverty as the result of individual deficiencies is an easy way out. It lets us avoid taking any responsibility for working to change the situation. Alternatively, poverty can be seen as the result of a society with inadequate opportunities and an inadequate social safety net. As Professor Douglas Durst of Memorial University suggests,
we live in a country that is based on the principles of liberal capitalism. It's a capitalist society. It's the free market is pretty much in control. However, our government feels that it needs to regulate and put some restraints on it. In that sense, it's a liberalized capitalism. In a capitalist society, there's going to have to be a kind of a pool of unemployed, a pool of poor people, in which case to make comparative adjustments and comparative explanations. So our poor are, in fact, part of the society rather than something which is seen as needed to be eradicated or changed.
Not only do the unemployed suffer as a result of this kind of economic organization, but many workers are also directly affected by it. Many workers who hold down part and even full-time jobs live below the poverty line, while others live just barely above it. In addition, many jobs lack security. Tom Hanlon of the Newfoundland Association of Public Employees represents many food service workers in the city.
Obviously, we live in a very competitive province for jobs. And for the food service industry, the comparison is the minimum wage. We're told that we have to compete. The market economy is the only criteria, that we shouldn't consider social factors or social values.
Just how big a problem is poverty? Recent studies have established that 1 in 6 Canadian children suffers the impact of poverty. In Newfoundland, the proportion increases to 1 in 4. But how does poverty affect people's lives? What does it mean to be poor?
Well, I guess one word could really describe it. It was very hard to be poor in Newfoundland because, you know, to be poor means you have to do without many of the basic necessities of life. Oh yes, there were many days when I've kept the children home because I didn't have lunches to send them. And other times when I sent them to school with lunches that I felt weren't very adequate, but at least they were something for that day.
The face that I see of poverty in this community is a lot of stress, which is brought on by not having the adequate resources to buy the necessities of life, and that stress oftentimes leads to many other social problems, such as a family breakup, maybe alcohol or drug addiction. It might lead to juvenile delinquency or early dropout from school, or certainly underachievement at school.
What usually happens is you make it on your check as far as you can, and then you visit the food banks in order to try and close up the gap between running out of this 2 weeks' money and hitting your next payday. So usually what would happen was you'd probably end up with 4 days in between that you didn't have any money or any food. You would go to the food bank and make it for probably 2 or 3 of those days, and the other day it'd be done on just prayers alone.
It's hard trying to keep it going. Light bills and stuff like that, that's what takes the money out of it. And getting their school stuff and, you know, keeping blouses and everything there for them and that. But only for them banks and food banks and stuff like that, you wouldn't survive it. You wouldn't.
Food banks are a way for people to survive from one day to the next. However, many people feel that they are no kind of solution in the long run.
You know, off the top of my head, I would like to say get rid of them, but I know that's not the answer either. But I think as long as there are food banks, then the people that have the responsibility of providing for people that for some reason or another can't provide for themselves, then they're just not doing it. I mean, food banks are a Band-Aid solution. You know, the people that are in need are going there daily or monthly or however often they can and getting food. But I mean, it takes away, the accountability is not there to the government, or, you know, and I think that's where it should be.
Food banks will stop people from being hungry, but the situation is not changing, so the hungry will always be there.
Because they're based on the principle of handouts, using food banks is hard on people's self-esteem. But for people who live below the poverty line, many such humiliating experiences are required for survival.
I mean, it's humiliating, it's depressing, it's despair, it's hopelessness total lack of control. I mean, it takes away your very identity as a parent. And as I say, the dictionary doesn't have one word which can do it justice in describing it. The very first few visits I made to the food bank, I mean, there was also a feeling of hope and a feeling of relief, because you went to the food bank with hopes of getting enough food to get through the next couple of days. And when they gave you your couple of bags of food, of course, you were relieved, because now at least you had something, even if it wasn't very much. But after this becoming part of my regular shopping trips, it was almost like, you know, when you got your check, you went to the supermarket, and when what you bought at the supermarket ran out, you went to the food bank. Then I think it started to change to hopelessness, because I felt that I would have to be doing this all of the time. And with each trip, it became harder and harder to sort of psych myself up to going there, because you had the feeling that people in the food bank were saying, oh no, she's coming again. You know, what does she do with her money? That she's always down here every second week, right? And I mean, of course, it's the natural notion is that the victims are to blame because you're mismanaging your money or you're wasting your money. But it's never the government's fault for giving you inadequate money in the first place.
Well, I had 2 kids drop out of school, and one is going back now to the TI Learning Centre, right? I'm really glad of that. But I think, you know, that they know at a very early age from mine, you know what I mean? Like, we always went to the Salvation Army to get cheap clothes. I think I was always nifty with a buck and say, well, we can't, I've got to wait for a check, you know? And I think really young, they knew they were over here. And what they wouldn't come and say, well, you know, I got to go dance night. As they got older, they knew what was the point. They couldn't go, you know, most of the times, because you didn't have the money, or if you had the dollar, then they didn't have the clothes, the jeans they should have, and that means a lot. Really does.
Obviously, poverty creates stress on a day-to-day basis, but it also creates a situation from which it becomes increasingly difficult to escape.
Well, actually, I would say that the cycle continues, because more of what we're seeing lately actually is second and third generation social assistance families, and that is because once you're trapped in the poverty cycle, it's easier to get on it than it is to get off it, because there are no initiatives built in the system to help anybody with even a little spark to create some opportunities in order to break the cycle. Then whatever little spark you may have, or shall we say ambition, you may have when you end up on a program like social assistance, it is usually dragged out of you within a couple of years of being on the system, because just having to cope with the system and having to cope with no food all the time and no money all the time and all the negatives of the system, it takes that very desire that you may have had coming on, oh, well, I'm only going on this for a short while. But as I say, it takes it out of you. And then it is so hard to get off because of the fact that there are no initiatives in the system, that you just basically give up unless you have a few good friends or something to keep you going, something that little bit extra.
In Canada, we like to think our school system allows everyone an equal opportunity. Yet it has been shown that children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to have less success at school. Nutritionist Annette Stapenhorst suggests that access to resources, including things as basic as food, is a significant factor in children's development.
Well, if you look at the relationship between nutrition and health, it's quite obvious that adequate food is a basic prerequisite for good health. Nutritious food is especially important for proper growth and development for children and during pregnancy. So you see there problems related to poor pregnancy outcome are a major concern among poor people, especially people that are very poor that don't have enough, don't have access to adequate food. And then growth and development among children is impaired, often to the extent that performance in school is affected. it's quite obvious that if a child is hungry, it can't concentrate on what is going on in school, and they are not able to benefit from the educational system the same way adequately nourished children are. And that, of course, in the long term has an effect on how well they are able to manage in society as adults. So it's not just physical, but emotional and social well-being that is at risk through poor nutrition.
There have been responses to the knowledge that children cannot learn as easily without access to adequate nutrition. One of these is a school lunch program, which has been set up in a St. John's Elementary School. This program is designed to ensure that all students will have a wholesome lunch every day, regardless of their ability to pay for the meals. Because not even the teachers know which students have paid for their lunches, there's no possibility of stigmatization.
Glad to say that yes, it has worked. It has definitely provided lunches to children who otherwise would have been hungry or would have been kept at home because they didn't have lunches that day. And it is done so in such a way that no child or no parent is afraid to use the program for fear of being identified. It does it in a total non-identifying way, and that is the key to its success, I think. The teachers have noticed that kids can now do seat work for longer periods of time. They seemed more healthy, more exuberant. They have more energy for, you know, playing and being in gym and things like that. And they also have, in several cases, we have lowered the attendance rate. Like kids that missed 28 days last year, for example, we have one child missed 28 days. This year he's missed 4.
The first things which some of the teachers noticed was that some of the children were gaining weight, which is a very real, tangible result from the program.
Part of the reason that the school lunch program has worked so well is that rather than depending on individual acts of charity, as food banks must do, it's been supported jointly by the church and the government. Obviously then, if we want to get rid of poverty, all levels of society, from individuals to governments, will have to commit themselves to resolving the problem.
It's going to have to start getting in there and admitting the problem is there. People don't admit it. Won't admit it. They'll blame it on people drinking. They'll blame it on people smoking. They'll blame it on everything, but they won't look right in front of their nose and see it there.
One thing I would like to see is for people to become more public on the problems of living in poverty, because I think as long as we keep our mouth shut and our eyes closed, it'll never be faced and it'll never be dealt with. I would like people that are living in poverty to become more vocal and to say to the public, to the government, to whoever's ears are there to listen, that, you know, we're not going to, we can't live like this anymore. You know, we need help.
As individuals, one of the central things we can do is approach the issue in terms of social justice rather than charity. This means looking for permanent solutions rather than settling for band-aids that may only serve to entrench poverty more deeply.
And if the country were serious about removing poverty, well, then it would have to take steps in terms of redistributing the wealth of the nation. To eradicate poverty would require greater government intervention, and that goes against the thinking of those people who are strong advocates for a free market and capitalist society.
It's time we recognize that poverty in Canada is a serious social problem and that serious efforts will be needed to eradicate it. All sectors of society have a role to play, from the individual to the school, the church, and the community group. If individual Canadians do not demand the eradication of poverty, government will not make this issue a priority. Of course, many people will say that with the size of the Canadian deficit, we can't afford to tackle the problems of poverty. However, the long-term social and economic costs of neglecting the issue now should lead us to ask whether we can afford not to take action on this issue immediately. Many groups and individuals recognize the urgency of this issue and are already active in this area in the hopes of creating a more just society.
And quite a number of our neighbours here are actively involved in this community to make it a better community, to do something about the problem of poverty. But it's a major problem, and it doesn't change overnight. But I'm hopeful that something can be done.
Society believes in freedom and liberty, and their definition of freedom and liberty is freedom to do things, freedom to, whereas we really need to question that and say it's freedom from poverty, it's freedom from oppression, it's freedom from squalor and hunger. And that's really what those of us who advocate moving towards a society that's based on equality, it's moving towards freedom from these things, not just freedom to do as one pleases.
I guess if we're heard long enough, loud enough, the government will start listening and doing something to help us, I hope. Or I don't know where we'll go.
I think the stigma comes from people who don't understand. I mean, it's their attitude. They think that people on welfare are looking for an easy way out, an easy ride on their dollars, that kind of thing. And, you know, I don't think it's their fault, because it's the way that, again, society has trained us to think. You know, there has to be, I think, re-education and information given, some way that people can understand what it's really like. I mean, we're not here because we want to be. Surely, God, we don't want to be on welfare.
While they're standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know?
These problems are complex, and the solutions are also complex, but you have to work along with the people who are experiencing poverty to know what these solutions are.
Poor people gonna rise up, get their share. Poor people gonna rise up and take what's theirs. Don't you know you better